At UFC 128 in 2011, Rashad Evans changed the landscape of the light heavyweight division by getting a knee injury, which prevented him from fighting Mauricio Shogun Rua in their scheduled title fight for the light heavyweight championship. And that changed absolutely everything because John Jones then replaced Rashad Evans and fought Mauricio Rua. He won the title and then arguably became the most dominant champion in UFC history. In this video, we will be kicking John Jones out and we'll look to see what would have happened between Mauricio Shogun Rua and Rashad Evans if the fight actually took place at UFC 128, using both of them in their UFC primes. So we're running through their strengths, their weaknesses, their keys to their victory against each other, and of course, the final outcome of the fight. Kicking it off with Rashad Evans. Now, Rashad, he was one of the fastest in the light heavyweight division. Very, very good wrestling as well. Came from a wrestling base, so that means he did have the cardio there as well. And up until he lost by KO to Lyoto Machida, he had insane momentum. He was undefeated up until that fight. And overall, he was a fairly well-rounded fighter. Now, when we look at Mauricio Rua, he had the KO power 100%. He was an absolute finishing machine, and he had technically never been finished on the feet up until this point as well. He did have one finish loss to Mark Coleman in Pride, but that was only due to him breaking his arm from Mark Coleman shooting on a takedown and he was trying to post. So technically that was a doctor's stoppage finish. It wasn't actually a TKO finish. And in the UFC, he just KO'd Lyoto Machida in their rematch in the second fight, and Lyoto Machida had just annihilated Rashad Evans. And honestly, I think when it comes to Mauricio Rua and Lyoto Machida, in their first fight, I honestly think that Mauricio got robbed out of that first fight. I think he put on more damage, more output, and he should have had the title sooner. So barring that, he had some pretty good momentum himself. Now, when we look at the striking specifics and the statistics overall, Rashad, he had very, very good movement. It was one of the best parts of his game, and he definitely had KO power there. I wouldn't say up to Mauricio Rua's standard, but when you look at his fights back then, the KO power was definitely there. You see him wiping out Sean Salmon with a head kick and annihilating Chuck Liddell's chin for good with that beautiful overhand, and that overhand was honestly just from hell. It completely destroyed Chuck Liddell, flatline KO'd him, and you can't forget to mention that he beat Forrest Griffin for the title as well by ground and pounds. He definitely had a good range of striking there. He's got the ground and pound, the overhands. I mean, he's very, very fast. He's got good counter striking capabilities as well. And then he's obviously got the head kick too. But I would ultimately, saying all that, I would give Mauricio Rua the advantage overall on the feet. Evans definitely has the speed advantage, but Rua definitely has the power advantage. When it comes to Mauricio Rua, technically, he had pretty clean Muay Thai, and obviously up until this point, looking at the statistics specifically, he had 16 KOs out of the 19 wins he had at this point, and he was only 27 years old. So yeah, he was just incredible when it came to knocking people out, and his best strength was definitely his Muay Thai. He had a very strong double collar tie and would land really nice clinch knees. Prime example of this, in Pride, he destroyed Rampage Jackson with clinch knees. And not to mention as well, when it comes to Mauricio Rua, outside of the cage, you have Rafael Cordeiro as his coach. So that just means that his Muay Thai was just on the up and up and up, because Rafael Cordeiro is a Muay Thai genius. And he was very instrumental in pretty much shaping the way Mauricio Rua was striking, and that was easily Mauricio Rua's best attribute. So yeah, having a good corner like that definitely puts it into perspective. And I think when it comes to the clinch game of Mauricio Rua, it's definitely where he would be best in this fight, to make sure that he can trap Evans because of Evans' crazy movement. Now, I think overall, yes. I do think that Mauricio Rua does have that striking advantage over Rashad Evans, especially when it comes to that KO power and in close in that dirty boxing to clinch range. But when we look at the wrestling, it's definitely the most swayed attribute here. It's obviously in Rashad Evans' favor. Rashad just has much better movement, especially when initiating takedowns, and he pretty much has taken down every single fighter he has fought up until this point, up until this fight was being made. Now, Mauricio Rua, when we look at his wrestling, statistically, he's stuffed less than half of his takedowns that have been attempted on him. And honestly, Mauricio Rua, looking at these separate disciplines, he is the more one-dimensional fighter out of the two of them. And when it comes to Mauricio and his striking, when we're comparing it to the wrestling, he would, especially in the UFC, he would throw very wild exchanges when moving forward. And I think with Rashad Evans' speed, he could definitely drive through for a takedown by countering his forward pressure. Lyoto Machida, when they fought, was able to get Mauricio Rua down multiple times. So I don't think that this would be a problem for Rashad Evans when you're looking at that comparability of Lyoto Machida's takedown offense compared to Rashad Evans' takedown offense, And when we look at Rua on the ground, he is definitely better defensively than he is offensively, in that he has decent get-ups. He has always had pretty good ways of being able to get up, especially off the cage. And he is just, I just feel like that he's just not very good at stuffing the actual takedowns in the first place. Yes, he's got the good get-ups. He's got the part where he can get back up eventually, but not getting taken down in the first place and being controlled is a huge issue for Rua. And a big issue in combination with that is Mauricio Rua's stamina. He is obviously, to get up from a takedown, it's going to take a lot of stamina to obviously tear their bloody hands off you, making sure that you can break their grip and making sure that you're not getting dragged back to the ground. So you have to use a lot of leg strength. And that's where that stamina gets chewed up. And that is one of Mauricio Rua's worst parts of his game, is his stamina. His stamina is not good at all. And when we look at the BJJ comparison, just to finalize things here, I mean, there isn't just a whole lot to say in the BJJ department overall. Evans had two submission wins at the start of his career in 2004, and they were just against low-level competition. Obviously, it was the very start of his career, at the start of his pro career, and he hasn't been submitted, to be fair, but Mauricio Rua is just not the one to do it. Understandably, Mauricio Rua did achieve his black belt in 4 years. However, it just was not reflected in MMA at all. I mean, he's 1-2 with submissions up until this point, and I believe up until all the way up to the end of his career, he was 1-3. He never got another submission again, and he only lost by submission another time, which I believe may have been to Chael Sonnen. I'm not entirely sure. But yeah, ultimately, his submission game is just not reflected in MMA. So, it's when you look at him in Pride, the only thing we can take away from his submission game with that one win is that he did get the submission against Kevin Randleman in 2006 in Pride, which I just really can't count. He got a nice knee bar there, but in that time period, in that era, Kevin Randleman was a severely one-dimensional wrestler, a very explosive wrestler, and he clearly, obviously, did not have the BJJ base there and did not have defensive submission awareness back then. So you can't really say, especially that Rashad's going to have an issue when it comes to Mauricio Rua's ground game. I just don't see a world where Rashad Evans gets submitted by Mauricio Rua unless Mauricio Rua knocks him down badly and then goes for a choke, which Mauricio Rua is just not known to do that. He's more known for ground and pound finishes. Now, there aren't really any physical advantages for both of them. They both pretty much have identical reach, age, height, and they're the same stances too. And when it comes to their weight differential, I don't think there would be much weight differential when they rehydrate as well, because they've both fought at light heavyweight and heavyweight technically as well. For Mauricio Rua in Pride, he fought around 225 pounds. So definitely in that heavyweight range, but it was much lighter. But that's the same as Rashad Evans when he fought on The Ultimate Fighter Season 2. He fought as a very light heavyweight. Now, when we look at Rua again, one of the biggest issues for him is obviously just that history of cardio problems. He's shown that through most of his fights, especially coming into the UFC. One of the worst performances I have seen from him is when he fought Mark Coleman in their second fight. He just looked, honestly, I think he looked terrible. He almost completely gassed out in that fight, pretty much by the second round, and that's him fighting a 45-year-old Mark Coleman. And Mark Coleman was pretty much able to level his gas tank, and that was only 3 fights before this fight was supposed to happen. And when you compare that cardio capability of Rashad Evans to Mark Coleman, it's just a night and day difference. Rashad Evans can happily and easily, I think, go 5 rounds. And it's also funny to see, like, the reason behind, as I said at the start of the video, how John Jones has obviously gone through and become the champion because Rashad Evans pulled out with that knee injury. It's funny because you look at Mauricio Rua, and he's actually the one that has sustained multiple knee injuries in his career. And it's even just up to the point that he just, like, it just could not be prevented. Like, he was just getting knee injury. And the issue, it is unfortunate because I think that is what completely halted his chances of actually reaching his potential in the UFC specifically. He was fantastic in Pride, but I think the stamina, the cardio issues, and the injuries, the consistent injuries, just completely halted his growth in the UFC. And Mauricio Rua is definitely one of those fighters who has a very similar issue, just like Cody Garbrandt and Joe Stevenson, is that he just peaked too early in his career. And after having a few losses, he just never regained his form again. You are probably thinking that, like, why does that matter if we're only looking at him up to UFC 128? Well, even though he was able to win a title, I honestly do think that he peaked around 24 to 25 years old in this Pride era. He just looked so much faster then, which is another issue in this fight for him compared to Rashad Evans. And I mean, he was able, like, in Pride, he was able to take out Rampage Jackson and Alistair Overeem twice, and they're obviously huge names. You know, Jackson, UFC champion, and Alistair Overeem, a huge contender as well. And ultimately, he just was not the same after he lost to Forrest Griffin at UFC 76. He could not string a consistent win streak together throughout the whole entirety of the rest of his career after he lost to Forrest Griffin. Now, moving on to the keys to victory, I mean, Rua firstly just needs to keep this fight standing. That differential in their disciplines for wrestling specifically is just, it's a very wide gap. Evans clearly has that wrestling base, that skill set there, and just outmatches him when it comes to the ground game, and he's got the good gas tank to go along with it. And when it comes to that gas tank, I think that Rashad Evans can actually ride out the fight for full 5 rounds. I think he can ride it out if he gets a successful top position. And he has the movement advantage overall as well, whether it be on the inside or the outside. Whereas Mauricio Rua had very good leg kicks, which I emphasize the leg kicks. He needs to be able to compromise Rashad's movements as early as possible. Because if Rashad is able to move freely the way that he wants to, he's going to be able to get quicker shots off, whether it be striking or actually shooting for a takedown. And then that's just going to cause so many issues, especially when it comes to scorecards for Mauricio Rua. Now, neither of them can get over aggressive in this fight, though. If Rashad obviously finds his flow and he's obviously putting the volume up, he cannot get over aggressive, because obviously Mauricio Rua has got the KO power advantage here, and I don't think it would take much for Mauricio. If Mauricio Rua can properly land and find his flow there, like especially against the cage, if he cuts him off, like, I would not be surprised if Rashad Evans gets Lyoto Macheted. Now, that being said, though, Mauricio Rua cannot get over aggressive himself, because we saw exactly what happened to Chuck Liddell. When you do that against Rashad Evans, you get sent to the Shadow Realm with an overhand from hell. So, yeah, both of them, just no over-aggression there. Otherwise, someone's getting slept. Now, when we look at Rua, he definitely can punish Rashad Evans in the clinch. It's definitely his best chance to actually win the fight, as I said, in the striking department. But he needs to make sure that if he is getting in that clinch, he's not letting Rashad free for a single leg, or just in any way, shape, or form to get him to the ground. So he has to be very careful there. I would say he'd probably want to like widen his body and then really load up for the knees, getting the knees to the chin, especially the body. If he can do anything to cut down Rashad Evans' gas tank, as well as chop those legs down, that is his best bet to win this fight. He ultimately just needs to avoid the ground game at all costs. And then when we look at Evans, he needs to utilize the movement as much as he can. He needs to draw out that aggression from Mauricio Rua so he can then drain the gas tank of him. And especially when it comes to that forward pressure of Mauricio Rua, Evans needs to take advantage of that. He needs to get to that point where Mauricio Rua is coming in and then he can time a takedown off of Mauricio Rua swinging big. And if he can do that and maintain top control, I have no doubt that he can completely drain Mauricio Rua's gas tank. And if he does that, Mauricio Rua is in a hell of a lot of trouble. Now, I think when we look at Mauricio Rua, he is more of a primitive fighter than Rashad was. Rashad was definitely more so he had a good mixture. He had a good flow. He was very good at mixing his striking and defensive wrestling together. Whereas when you look at Mauricio Rua, he relied very heavily on power and did not really switch his game up that much. Like, Mauricio Rua pretty much was that stand-up fighter, very good striking, and he had a knee bar in there or a heel hook. Realistically, that's where it is. That's where his game really was at that point, and it consistently kind of stayed like that throughout his career. So I'm pretty confident in saying that he was at least a bit one-dimensional in his fighting style. As I said, I would give Rua the power advantage. He was a finishing machine, especially back then, having 16 KOs out of 19 wins at that point, which could definitely be a decisive factor in this fight with Evans, specifically because Evans obviously got flatlined by Lyoto Machida just 2 fights before this one was going to take place. However, when you look at the 2 fights in between the Machida fight and this Mauricio Rua fight for Rashad, he beat both Thiago Silva and Rampage Jackson by unanimous decision, which in those fights, he was a lot more conservative in. He utilized his wrestling game a lot more, which if he took the same style of fight further, using that conservative style against Mauricio Rua, I think it would have worked wonders for him. Mauricio Rua back then just didn't have the greatest takedown defense and was not fast on the feet either. And I think this is where the deciding factor is. Against Rua, I think Evans getting finished by Machida actually sets him up well for this fight. Evans, when you look at him in the fight against Machida, he was exchanging a lot in their fight, which I think he thought that there was an aura of invincibility, or that he just had an aura of invincibility around him because he was undefeated, and he just, obviously with that movement, he probably thought he just couldn't be touched. And then he obviously paid for it. So having the Machida fight, changing up his game because of it, and becoming more wrestle heavy, makes me think that he would have gone into the fight with the right game plan against Mauricio Rua. And moving on to the fight takes, kicking it off with round 1, I believe that the fight would play out by Rua trying to close the distance early. but he wouldn't be cutting the cage off effectively. And I think that would allow Rashad to stick and move throughout that first round. Now, when it comes to the second round, I think Rua would then start overcommitting a bit more heavily and landing. So he would land some decent shots here and there, I think. I mean, he's not like someone with zero strike accuracy. I definitely think that he can land on Rashad Evans, but with Rashad's movement early in that fight, I just don't see... I see Rua tagging him, but I don't see him getting a very, very good shot off to the point where Rashad's going to get hurt. And I think when it comes to that overcommitting of strikes, I think that Rashad would then be able to level change with his speed and get Rua onto his back and draw out that second round. Now with the third round, I think Rua would then start swinging more heavily to try and get Rashad out of there, because I think it would just come down to a term of frustration for him. But the issue is that would then further drain his gas tank, and when it comes to even just the second or third round, his gas tank is struggling, and this is a 5-round fight. So I think that Rashad would then find even more success in getting those takedowns more effectively due to Mauricio Rua's low stamina, and especially him being out of position with the overcommitted shots. So I think Rashad would be able to not only get those takedowns, but land some decent counter strikes in that third round. But I think it would end by, towards the end of the third round, he would get the takedown and get off some decent ground and pound, and he would be in top control. Now, by the fourth round, I think Rua would be exhausted, and Rashad would be able to just take him down pretty easily. And I think that, honestly, at the start of the fourth round, Rashad would be able to transition to mount and get that ground and pound TKO finish. Now, ultimately, I think if Rua keeps it standing and prevents the takedowns, then he could knock Evans out for sure. However, I just don't think Mauricio Rua can stuff all of Rashad's attempts, and he just isn't great off his back. He doesn't have that takedown defense there. He does have good get-ups, but get-ups require stamina, which I don't think Rashad will allow him to have, just off of the sheer amount of takedowns that Rashad would land on him. And ultimately, if it comes to the ground, Rashad's in top control. I don't see Mauricio Rua having much of a submission threat there. As I said in the BJJ department, I just don't think he has the capability of getting Rashad out of there with a submission threat. And if he's on his back, he's not going to be able to finish him with strikes. So ultimately, I do think that Rashad will take this one fairly convincingly once it hits the ground. If you've enjoyed the video and you want to see more MMA-based content like these Mythical Matchups videos, please like, comment, subscribe, and I'll catch you in the next one.